Everyone told her to leave that place alone, and now she finally understands why. A poor single mom and her 3 young kids inherited a forgotten winter cabin on the edge of 2 harbors, hoping for nothing more than warmth and shelter. But the moment they stepped inside, strange sounds echoed through the frozen walls. And when her children uncovered a sealed wooden box beneath the old floorboards, they found letters that revealed a secret the land had guarded for generations. What they discovered would rewrite the town's history and change their lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The wind carved through the frozen streets of Duluth like a blade drawn slowly across stone. For 4 nights in a row, Claire Thompson had slept sitting upright in the driver's seat of her battered silver minivan, her 3 children curled under layers of mismatched blankets behind her. Claire was 32, a woman with tired hazel eyes that once shone with stubborn hope, long chestnut hair now tied back in a fraying elastic, and a thin frame shaped by months of skipping meals so her kids could have an extra bite. Her skin, pale from the relentless Minnesota winter, carried the soft freckles of someone who once knew sunlight but had not felt its warmth in far too long. She had always been gentle by nature, the quiet kind of strong, the type who apologized even when others wronged her. But these past months had carved new edges into her edges made of fear, desperation, and a love fierce enough to burn through frost. Ethan, her oldest at 10, huddled closest to the window, his small face pressed into a pillow whose stuffing peeked through torn seams. He had inherited Claire's hazel eyes, but none of her softness. The world had made him wary too soon. His dark brown hair was always messy, sticking up like he had fought winter itself. Ethan had become the protector of the family without ever being asked. His thin shoulders squared every time he sensed danger, and his voice carried a steady calm that reminded Claire painfully of his late father. Mia, 7 years old, slept beside him, her golden hair spilling over Ethan's arm, her face peaceful despite everything. Mia was gentle and dreamy, a girl who whispered secrets to her stuffed rabbit and believed kindness could thaw even the coldest hearts. She saw beauty where others saw ruin. A cup of melted snow would become a winter tea party, and a ripped blanket became a princess cape. Her innocence was a fragile light Claire feared might slip away. And then there was Aiden, only 4 small for his age, with wide blue eyes and chubby cheeks flushed pink from the cold. He clutched a faded toy truck as if it were an anchor holding his tiny world together. Aiden spoke in short bursts, his voice still soft and babyish, and though he barely understood why they no longer had a home, he sensed the heaviness in the air and stayed close to Claire whenever fear crept into his dreams. Tonight, the cold was harsher than usual. The minivan rattled as gusts hit its rusted sides, shaking loose tiny flakes of metal like snow of its own. Claire pulled her thin coat tighter. It had once been a warm burgundy wool coat, but years of wear had thinned its lining. She cared little for herself. Her eyes moved constantly between her children, checking their breaths, tucking in corners of blankets, adjusting the small space heater balanced on the dashboard. It ran on borrowed time and borrowed batteries, and she whispered a silent plea that it would last until morning. She hated this life. Hated the fear in Ethan's voice, the way Mia's smile dimmed each night, the soft whimper Aiden made when he woke from cold. The guilt was bone deep. This wasn't the motherhood she had promised herself, but life had a way of breaking its own promises first. The cold made everything feel heavier, even hope. Claire reached into the glove box and pulled out a thick envelope once more. The paper had yellowed edges, stiff and curled from being handled too often. She had received it earlier that evening at the homeless outreach desk inside the Duluth post office. A kind volunteer, an older woman with white curls and a knitted scarf, had called her name softly and handed it over with a look Claire couldn't read. Pity. Relief. Fear. Claire didn't know any more. She had taken the envelope, thanked the woman, and walked out without asking questions. She didn't have the energy for questions. Now, sitting in the dim interior of the van, she stared at the envelope again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The children stirred at the soft crinkle of paper. Ethan blinked awake, rubbing his eyes with a sleepy alertness far older than his 10 years. "Mom," he whispered. "What's that?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she murmured. "But maybe something good." She didn't dare believe it not fully. Hope was dangerous when you were hanging by a thread. She unfolded the letter. The heading read, "Lake County Abandoned Property Assistance Program." Her breath caught. She had applied months ago, back when they still had a tiny apartment in West Duluth, and she still believed stability was within reach. The program promised temporary ownership of unused rural properties to families in crisis, old cabins, farmhouses, forgotten land. She had sent in the application because dreaming cost nothing, even if reality disagreed. She hadn't heard back not once, and the eviction came far sooner than any letter. But here it was now. She read slowly, her vision blurring as her eyes filled with tears she didn't yet allow to fall. "Congratulations. Your family has been selected." The words swam. Ethan leaned closer. "Mom, did we get something?" Mia shifted, waking with a quiet yawn, her small hand reaching for Claire's arm. "Is it good news?" she asked in a hopeful whisper. Aiden pushed up on his elbows, blinking sleepily. "Mama," he mumbled. Claire swallowed hard. "It says, we've been granted temporary ownership of a property. A cabin." The van fell silent except for the wind tapping against the glass. Ethan was the first to speak. "A real house?" Claire nodded unsteadily. "Yes. Near 2 harbors." Mia gasped softly. Like a storybook cabin," Claire gave a shaky smile. Maybe. In truth, she didn't know what it would be. It could be falling apart, unheated, unsafe. But even a broken cabin was better than the back seat of a minivan. The letter included a map, a set of instructions, and a date she was supposed to arrive 2 days ago. Her heart clenched. She had missed the appointment. Panic surged through her chest, swift and sharp. Had she lost the opportunity? She scanned the rest of the letter frantically until she found a handwritten note at the bottom. "Property remains reserved for 7 days. Please arrive when able. Weather conditions understood." A breath she didn't realize she was holding escaped her. Relief washed over her in a warm wave, spreading through her tired limbs like sunlight beneath ice. For the first time in months, Claire felt something lift inside her, a small spark fighting its way through the frost of despair. "Kids," she said softly, her voice unsteady, "tomorrow morning, we're driving to see our new place." Ethan's eyes widened with cautious hope. Mia clapped her hands over her mouth to stop a squeal. Aiden grinned sleepily, curling into her side. The heater clicked off, the last flicker of warmth fading, but Claire didn't panic this time. She looked at her children, 3 small souls who had endured far more than they should, and whispered a promise she prayed she could keep. "Everything's going to change." She placed the letter back into the envelope, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Outside, snow continued to fall quiet and relentless, as if the night itself was blessing their fragile hope. Somewhere deep within her, buried under exhaustion and fear, Claire felt the faintest echo of something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. Maybe the land really did choose people. Maybe, after everything, it had chosen them. And though she couldn't know it yet, the old cabin waiting in the frozen woods of 2 harbors was about to change their lives forever. The road to 2 harbors wound through a world made of snow, and silence, the trees standing tall and skeletal as though guarding the last fragments of winter. Claire drove slowly, gripping the steering wheel with cold, stiffened fingers, while her 3 children watched the landscape blur into white ribbons. The old minivan shuddered each time the tires hit a patch of ice, but Claire kept her eyes forward, guided by both fear and fragile determination. Inside her chest, hope pulsed unevenly. Too new, too delicate, like a moth testing its wings after a long winter. Ethan leaned forward between the front seats, his breath misting the air. His dark, unruly hair was tucked under a beanie far too thin for the cold, and there was a stubborn focus in his gaze. "How much farther, Mom?" he asked, gentle but alert as he always was. He watched the road the way a 10-year-old shouldn't have to, as if danger might leap from the snowdrifts. Claire softened. "We're close. 5 minutes, maybe." Behind him, Mia pressed her small pale face to the fogging window, tracing swirls in the condensation. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing green eyes, still bright with imagination despite exhaustion. "Does it look like a fairy tale house?" she asked dreamily. "Like the ones in my stories," Claire let out a small laugh. "Maybe not that pretty, sweetheart, but maybe it can be someday." Aiden kicked his tiny boots excitedly against the seat, his round cheeks flushed with anticipation. "We have house," he chirped, his little voice breaking on the last word. Claire reached back to squeeze his hand. "Yes, baby, we have a house." When she finally turned onto the narrow snow-packed trail indicated on the map, the van lurched, groaning under the strain, but pushed forward. Pines arched over the road like silent witnesses. And then, as they rounded the last bend, the cabin emerged half hidden beneath a quilt of snow, but unmistakably real. The cabin stood small and weather-worn, its once bright red roof now muted by time and frost. The white wooden boards of the exterior had peeled in long strips, exposing gray timber underneath. 2 fog-clouded windows stared out like tired eyes, and the front porch sagged, slightly weighed down by years of storms. But there was something undeniably gentle about the way it stood, as if waiting patiently for someone to claim it again. Ethan burst from the van, first boots crunching loudly in the snow. He halted in awe, his breath visible in the short, excited puffs. "Mom! Look, it's not falling apart!" he shouted, though that was only partially true. Mia climbed out, carefully shivering as the cold bit through her coat, then gasped when she noticed a faded wooden sign hanging crookedly by the door. "Snowbird Cabin," she whispered, tracing the letters with a mittened finger. "It has a name." Aiden waddled through the snow, nearly losing his balance, but giggled anyway. "How's pretty," he declared, pointing toward the sagging porch. Claire stepped out last, her boots sinking into the deep powder. The cold cut through her thin coat, but her heart warmed at the sight of her children, animated by something other than fear. She took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill her lungs, grounding herself. This could work, she told herself. This has to work. She walked toward the front door. The handle was cold metal rusted, but intact. She pushed, expecting resistance, but the door swung inward with a long, aching creak. The interior greeted them with a breath of frigid air, thick dust motes, shifting like old memories stirred awake. The cabin was small, one large room with a kitchenette against the left wall, a stone fireplace at the center, and a short hallway leading to 2 narrow bedrooms. Everything smelled faintly of wood smoke and disuse. Ethan darted toward the fireplace, his boots leaving small prints on the dusty floor. He knelt, examining the old cast-iron grate. "Mom, it's fixable, I know it is. The chimney's not blocked." His voice carried the earnest confidence of a boy trying to shoulder burdens too large for him. Claire's heart tightened with love and sorrow. Meanwhile, Mia stepped into one of the bedrooms, snowflakes still clinging to her hair. Her gasp echoed through the cabin. "Mom! Look," she cried. Claire hurried over. In the far corner of the tiny room, propped against the wall, was a small worn teddy bear with one button eye missing and a stitched smile barely holding together. Mia cupped the toy gently as though touching something sacred. "Somebody used to love him," she murmured. He waited for them to come back. The softness in her voice made Claire's chest ache. Aiden, not to be left behind, found joy simply by running in circles over the creaky wooden floorboards. His giggles filled the space, bouncing off the walls and warming it more than any fire could. Watching him, Claire felt her resolve settle into something solid. This is where we start again, she thought. She spent the next hour exploring the cabin more thoroughly while the children played. The plumbing didn't work. The kitchen's old metal sink was cracked. A family of spiders had clearly claimed the corner near the back window, but the roof, despite its age, had held. No leaks, no rot, and the fireplace, if repaired, could heat the entire space. Claire exhaled shakily. "We can fix this," she whispered to herself. "We can make it ours." As she evaluated the back porch, a movement in the trees caught her eye. A tall figure emerged from the pine line, hands lifted in a gesture of peace. Claire stiffened instinctively, stepping protectively in front of the doorway. Ethan noticed her tension and rushed to her side. The stranger approached slowly, revealing himself to be an older man in his late 60s. He wore a thick brown parka, snow-dusted boots, and a knitted hat pulled low over a weathered face. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, framing sharp blue eyes softened by years of quiet kindness. His gait had a slight limp, perhaps, from an old injury, giving him an uneven but steady rhythm as he walked. When he stopped a few feet away, he smiled a small, tentative smile that didn't feel threatening. "Afternoon," he said, his voice rough, like gravel but warm. "Didn't mean to startle you. Name's Walter Hayes. I live down the road." Claire studied him carefully. Walter held himself with the calm confidence of someone who had weathered many winters and learned to respect other people's boundaries. Deep lines creased his forehead, signs of both age and a life lived through hardship. But his eyes, clear, pale blue, held genuine concern. "Sorry," Claire said, pulling her coat tighter. "We just got here." Walter nodded. "Saw the county folks parked here last week. Figured someone new would arrive soon. This place, she's got a long history." He looked past Claire at the cabin as though seeing a memory layered over it. "If you need any tools or help getting the fireplace going, I've got extras. Winter's not kind to newcomers." Ethan stepped forward, shoulders squared as if trying to appear older. "We can fix it," he said firmly. Walter smiled at him. "Bet you can kid. But an extra pair of hands never hurts." Claire hesitated, but something about the man's steady presence eased her nerves. "Thank you," she said, choosing trust cautiously. Walter tipped his hat. "I'll let you settle in. Holler if you need anything." As the sun began to dip, painting the snow a soft pink. Claire stood on the porch and looked at her children through the doorway, Mia brushing dust off her new teddy bear, Ethan stacking firewood from the porch's corner, Aiden curled on the floor, hugging his toy truck. A wave of emotion crashed through her fear. Hope, exhaustion, love blending into something fierce and unyielding. "We'll start from here," she whispered to herself. "Whatever it takes." And in that moment, something shifted inside her, like the fragile beginning of a promise between the land and her heart. Snowbird Cabin wasn't perfect. It was battered, tired, and cold. But so was she. Maybe, just maybe, they could heal together. The third morning at Snowbird Cabin began in a hush of pale winter light, the kind that softened every edge and made the world feel fragile, yet strangely expectant. Overnight, a thick blanket of snow had settled over the pines, muting all sound and turning the yard into a white, untouched canvas. Claire stood at the frosted kitchen window, rubbing her palms together for warmth as she watched the sky brighten over the treetops. She had barely slept. Every new day in the cabin carried its own mixture of hope and uncertainty, and though the children adapted quickly, her mind churned with worries, repairs, food, heat. And now the odd little mysteries the house seemed eager to reveal. Behind her, the cabin creaked its old wooden bones, waking slowly with the cold. She had learned to distinguish the harmless sounds from the ones that meant trouble. But last night had been different. The repair work had begun as soon as they moved in. Ethan worked beside her each day with a seriousness that didn't match his age. This morning, he shuffled into the kitchen, still in his too large sweater hair sticking out at wild angles. His hazel eyes were alert, though groggy. "Mom," he murmured, rubbing sleep from his eyes, "did you hear it again last night?" The steps in the hallway. His voice held no fear, just quiet observation, the way a boy growing up too fast tried to protect his family. Claire forced a tired smile. "Old houses make strange noises, sweetheart. The cold makes the wood expand." Ethan nodded slowly, but she could see he didn't fully believe her. He was intuitive, the kind of child who felt shifts in a room before anyone else. Soon, Mia appeared at the doorway, wrapped in a handmade quilt she had found in a dusty cedar chest. Her golden hair fell in tangles around her face, and her green eyes were wide with the remnants of a dream. Mia was delicate but observant in her own imaginative way. "Mom," she whispered, "I think the house is talking." Claire crouched to her level. "Talking? How honey!" Mia pointed toward the living room. "I heard a whisper, like someone humming. But nice, like they weren't mad." Claire kissed her forehead. "You just heard the wind," she said softly, but a chill crawled down her spine. Snowbird Cabin was old, very old, and homes like this held memories. She just didn't know yet what kind. Aiden wandered in last, dragging his toy truck along the floor with a sleepy grin. 4 years old, round-cheeked and rosy from warmth, he seemed untouched by fear. "Mama," he chirped. The house said hello. Claire swallowed and forced cheer into her voice. "Then you should say hello back." Aiden giggled and did exactly that, waving at the rafters. Repairs filled most of their days. They patched walls, cleared debris, cleaned out closets layered with dust, mouse droppings, and abandoned furniture. On the 4th day, while clearing the hallway wall of cracked paneling, Claire noticed something odd. Tiny, straight lines carved into the wood underneath. She kneeled down, wiping the dust away. There, faint but deliberate, were initials E.L.R. Her brows furrowed. "Kids," she called, "come, take a look at this." Ethan crouched beside her, tracing the letters with gentle fingers. "Someone carved this," he said. Mia held her quilt tighter. "Do you think it's from the people who lived here before?" Claire nodded slowly. "Maybe. We'll keep it in mind." Later that afternoon, as Aiden napped in the bedroom and the older two sorted through cabinets, Claire returned to the second bedroom to inspect the closet. That was when she found it wedged behind a row of warped floorboards. A small, black-and-white photograph, yellowed with age, showing a family of 4 standing in front of the cabin in 1946. A tall man in suspenders, a woman with soft curls and a calm smile, and 2 children, a teenage girl and a small boy clutching her skirt. The corners of the photograph were brittle, but the expressions of the people were startlingly clear. The woman's eyes seemed almost familiar. Claire studied the back of the photo. A faded pencil note read, "Snowbird Summer of 46, Margaret." Claire felt a faint shiver. They were standing exactly where her family stood now. That night brought the heaviest snowfall yet. Thick flakes drifted past the windows like falling feathers, and the wind moaned softly against the eaves. They had lit the fireplace thanks to Walter Hayes, who brought over tools earlier that day, and its warm glow painted the room in gold and amber. Despite the warmth, the cabin felt restless like an animal shifting in its sleep. The children lay beside Claire on blankets near the fire, dozing off one by one. When the last ember burned low and shadows deepened, the first sound came, a soft, distinct click from the hallway. Then another. The unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, slow measured, deliberate. Claire tensed, her breath caught in her throat. Aiden stirred. Mia whimpered in her sleep. Ethan sat up instantly, eyes wide. "Mom," he whispered. The footsteps paused. Silence stretched like a held breath. Claire wrapped her arms around all 3 children, pulling them close. "It's just the cold," she murmured, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Just the cold, settling the wood. The cabin stayed still afterward, but Claire didn't sleep. Not fully. She drifted in and out, catching fleeting sounds, a faint thump, the whisper of wind through the chimney, the creak of boards. Part of her wanted to believe the house was simply old and lonely. Another part wondered if loneliness could echo. The next morning, with dark circles under her eyes, Claire tackled the loose floorboards in the living room. She pried one up carefully, expecting nothing more than dirt and spiders. Instead, her crowbar thunked against something solid. "Ethan," she called. He ran over eagerly. Together they cleared debris until a small wooden box emerged, ornate, carved with swirling patterns and initials that matched the ones on the wall, ELR. The lock was rusted shut. Ethan frowned. "Should we open it?" Claire nodded, but carefully. They worked for nearly an hour before the metal finally gave. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint scent of cedar and old paper. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, a small ring of tarnished keys, and a folded note on top. Claire lifted the note with trembling fingers. The handwriting was delicate, looping, undeniably feminine. "If you are reading this, then Snowbird has chosen you." Claire's breath caught. She read it again as if the words might shift under her gaze. Mia approached, hugging her teddy bear tightly. "Chosen," she echoed. "Like a guardian." Ethan stared at the keys. Chosen for what? Aiden climbed into Claire's lap, peering at the box. "Is it treasure?" Claire swallowed hard. "I don't know yet," she whispered. But inside her chest a strange heaviness and warmth tangled together, as if someone long gone had reached across time to tap her gently on the shoulder. The letters were old but well kept. The first envelope bore a date, December 14th, 1948. Claire felt a shiver, not of fear, but connection. Whoever wrote these hadn't wanted their story to disappear. Snowbird Cabin, with its peeling paint and whispered footsteps, had held on to pieces of its past for decades. Now it was offering them to her. As she traced the signature on the first letter, Margaret Lane, a quiet certainty settled inside her. The mysteries of Snowbird Cabin were only beginning. The storm arrived before dawn, sweeping in from Lake Superior with a violence that turned the world white. By the time Claire woke, the wind was already slamming against the cabin with a force that rattled every window pane. Snow fell in heavy sheets dense enough to erase the line between earth and sky, swallowing the forest whole. The temperature dropped so sharply the air inside the cabin felt brittle. Claire rose quietly from her blankets, pulling her coat tighter as she checked on the children. Ethan slept curled like a guard dog at the edge of the hearth, one arm still resting across a stack of firewood he had insisted on bringing inside last night. Mia lay with her teddy bear tucked under her chin, blonde hair fanned around her like a halo, the faint rise and fall of her chest a precious reassurance. Aiden snored softly in his nest of quilts, rosy-cheeked and blissfully unaware of the fury outside. Claire crouched by the fireplace. She had kept it burning through most of the night, and though the flames were low, they were still alive. She fed the fire carefully, the warmth licking her fingers as she added kindling. The storm roared louder, and the cabin groaned in response. It was an ancient soundwood, bending under pressure like old bones remembering pain. She told herself it was just the wind, but deep inside something else stirred, a familiar whisper of the house's presence, subtle but attentive, as if Snowbird Cabin was watching over them. When the children woke, the storm had intensified. The whole cabin trembled under its weight. Ethan sat up immediately, alert as ever, shaking off sleep with practiced speed. "Mom, what's going on?" His voice was steady, but his brow furrowed with worry. "Just a winter storm," Claire said, smoothing his messy dark hair. "It'll pass." Mia's green eyes widened as she peered out the frosted window. "It looks like the world disappeared," she whispered. Aiden toddled over, pressing his tiny hands against the cold glass. "Snowbird cold," he declared solemnly. Claire pulled them close. "We're safe. That's what matters." Around midday, the storm showed no sign of stopping. The wind forced icy drafts through every crack in the walls. Claire tried to block them with blankets, but the cold seeped through like a living thing. As she searched for more firewood, her gaze fell on the wooden box they had found beneath the floorboards, the one filled with Margaret Lane's letters. Something compelled her to open it again. The letters had aged their edges, fragile, smelling faintly of cedar and old smoke. She chose one addressed simply, "To the next woman who calls this place home." She read it by the fire's glow, her hands trembling slightly. Margaret Lane's handwriting was elegant and clean, the script of a woman accustomed to writing her way through sorrow. Margaret had been a widow raising 2 children in this cabin during the harsh winters of the 1940s. Her husband had died young, pneumonia likely, and she had held this house together with grit and stubbornness. Claire felt an instant connection to her, a kinship made of shared loneliness, shared fear, and shared determination. One passage made Claire's heart tighten. "This home has carried me through nights I never believed I would survive. If you are here now, it is because Snowbird chose you the way it once chose me. Trust its walls. Trust its land. It remembers kindness." Claire blinked away tears as she reached the final letter in the bundle, short-hurried and smudged with what looked like melted snow. "I believe this place will one day shelter the woman who needs it most. Let the house guide you. It knows the way when you do not." A shiver not from cold ran down Claire's spine. She glanced around the room. The fire crackled louder, almost as if answering. That evening brought a new test. The storm grew so fierce that snow forced its way under the porch door in thin, creeping waves. The cabin shook repeatedly, and the children huddled close to Claire. The fireplace suddenly sputtered, the flames shrinking dangerously low. Panic surged through her. Without heat, they wouldn't last the night. She grabbed the poker, trying to coax the flames, but the wood was damp. She whispered a desperate prayer. And then something strange happened. Ethan, searching for more supplies near the hallway closet, called out, "Mom, look at this." When Claire rushed over, she found him holding a small leather-bound journal that neither of them had seen before. Its cover was worn but intact, the initials M.L. stamped into the front. Claire flipped through it. Inside were handwritten notes detailing how to repair the fireplace chimney, instructions on cleaning the flue, even sketches illustrating airflow. "This wasn't here earlier," Ethan said, confused. Mia frowned. "Maybe the house left it for us." Claire didn't have an explanation, but she did know one thing: the instructions were exactly what she needed. With Ethan's help, she followed Margaret's step-by-step guide, clearing ash, buildup, adjusting the damper, repositioning the iron grate. Mia gathered dry kindling from the indoor stack, and Aidan, wanting to help, held the lantern with both tiny hands. Within minutes, the flames burst back to life, burning stronger than before. Heat spilled across the room, wrapping them all in its embrace. Claire released a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. But the strangeness didn't end there. When she went to check the porch door again, she found a perfectly cut plank of wood leaning against it. A single nail sat on top as if waiting for her. Earlier, she had checked the porch twice. The plank had not been there. Claire's pulse quickened. She stepped outside, braving the biting wind long enough to brace the door shut with the board. As she hammered it in place, a gust of snow lifted and swirled around her, and for an instant she thought she saw a figure standing near the tree line. A woman tall, wearing an old-fashioned winter coat, hair pinned back in soft curls. Claire blinked, but the figure vanished, leaving only drifting snow. As night settled fully, the storm reached its peak. The cabin rattled and moaned, but nothing broke. The fire held strong. The children ate canned soup, warmed over the flames, giggling whenever Aidan made faces at the steam. Claire forced herself to focus on them, grounding herself in their voices rather than the restlessness of the house. After the children fell asleep, she returned to the wooden box one more time. Beneath the letters, she found something she hadn't noticed before, a folded sheet of parchment, brittle at the edges. She opened it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map of the land surrounding the cabin-dense tree slope of the hill and a circle marking a specific spot. Next to it was a scribbled note. The water source freezes last here. Dig if needed. Claire's eyes widened. Their pipes had frozen the day before. If the map was right, they had another water source they could use. A hidden one. She clutched the map to her chest, overwhelmed. Snowbird Cabin wasn't just sheltering them, it was helping them. Or Margaret was. Or the land itself. She wasn't sure. But she felt watched not in fear, but in protection. She lay down beside her sleeping children, her exhaustion softened by awe. Outside the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a quiet warmth pulsed through the walls, a warmth that felt almost like gratitude. The first hints of spring arrived quietly, as if afraid to disturb the last breath of winter that lingered over Two Harbors. The snow retreated in slow, uneven patches, revealing dark soil-broken branches, and the first green tips of stubborn grass pushing through the thaw. For the first time since moving in, Claire stepped outside without her breath turning to crystal in the air. The cold was still present. This was Minnesota after all, but there was a softness to it now, a gentleness that made her believe something inside the land had shifted. Snowbird Cabin, battered and weary when they first arrived, now felt awake, alive. Claire stood on the porch that morning, hugging her thin wool coat around her waist, staring at the clearing sunlight filtering through the pines. The once sagging roof now sat straightened thanks to Walter's guidance. The fireplace, once temperamental and unpredictable, crackled with warmth every night because of Margaret Lane's journal. The cabin's drafty walls had been patched, sealed, and scrubbed by her small but determined family. And though there were still repairs to make, the place no longer felt abandoned. It felt claimed. Ethan was the first outside, his boots thudding against the thawing earth as he dragged a bundle of lumber toward the chicken coop he had been building. At 10 years old, he had the wiry strength of a boy used to doing more than he should. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, and though his face still carried shadows of the hardships they'd endured, he seemed taller, somehow less burdened. "Mom," he called, breath visible in faint puffs. "I think the roof of the coop is almost done. Walter said he might bring nails later." Claire smiled, pride swelling in her chest. Ethan never asked for praise, but he thrived on purpose. Mia sat nearby on a tree stump wearing the quilted jacket Claire had patched 3 times. Her golden hair glowed in the weak sunlight as she gently pressed soil into tin cans and jars she had collected from around the cabin. Inside each, she planted tiny seeds. Wildflowers, herbs, anything she could salvage. "The greenhouse is going to be magical," she whispered, her green eyes bright with imagination. Claire didn't have the heart to tell her the plastic sheet greenhouse might barely last the season. For Mia, magic always came first. Claire hoped that part of her would never change. Aiden toddled after a small brown dog with mismatched white paws and bright amber eyes. The dog had wandered onto their property 3 days ago, ribs visible beneath matted fur tail tucked in fear. Aiden had approached slowly, offering the dog his biscuit with a soft, "You hungry?" The dog had devoured it, then pressed its head into Aiden's tiny hands. Since then, the creature hadn't left their side. "Buddy, come back." Aiden squealed, now chasing the dog through puddles of melted snow. Buddy, a scruffy mutt no older than 2 years, bounded joyfully, shaking off droplets that sparkled in the sunlight. Aiden's laughter filled the clearing like a promise the land itself had been waiting for. Claire returned to her chores inside the cabin. She swept dust from the wooden stairs, wiped soot from the hearth, and finally faced the one room she had been avoiding, the attic. The attic was the last untouched section of the cabin, a steep ladder leading to a low-ceilinged space that smelled of old paper and time. She hesitated before climbing, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest whenever she uncovered something Margaret had left behind. It felt like intruding on someone's private grief. But the urge to understand Snowbird Cabin and the woman who once loved it carried her up the creaking steps. The attic was dim lit only by a single round window hazy with dust. Boxes lay scattered, some collapsed, others still intact. An old rocking chair sat in the corner, its paint cracked, its cushion faded. Claire carefully pushed aside crates of empty jars, yellowed linens, and children's wooden toys carved with initials she recognized from the wall, ELR. The attic felt untouched by storms, almost protected. She felt the peculiar hush she had come to associate with Margaret's presence. Then she saw it. A thin wooden folder wedged between two floorboards near the window. Something about its placement felt intentional, almost expectant. Claire knelt, prying it loose gently. The wood was brittle, but the clasp still held. She opened it and found a single sheet of parchment folded carefully inside. Her pulse quickened. She unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a deed, an old property certificate, browned with age but unmistakable. Margaret Lane was listed as the owner. The edges were worn, the ink faded, but on the back was a handwritten message, messy, rushed, and deeply personal. If you have found this, then this place belongs to you. It always has. Claire's breath caught in her throat, and her knees weakened. She sank to the attic floor, the paper shaking in her hands. For months, she had lived under the fear of uncertainty that the cabin was temporary, conditional, a fragile hope that could dissolve into nothing. But this message, this was different. It wasn't legally binding, perhaps, but it was a blessing, a welcome, a passing of the torch from one mother who had fought her battles to another who was still fighting hers. It was permission to belong, permission to stay. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed the paper to her chest, whispering, "Thank you, Margaret." It felt absurd to speak to someone who had died decades ago, yet she didn't feel foolish at all. Snowbird Cabin had a way of making the past feel close enough to breathe. When she climbed down the ladder, the sunlight pouring through the windows felt warmer. She stepped onto the porch where her children were gathered, Ethan hammering boards, Mia watering her jar garden, Aiden laughing as Buddy chased his boots. The sight of them broke something open inside her, a dam of fear and grief she had held for too long. She knelt in the snow-damp earth, wrapped her arms around all three children, and pulled them into her. Ethan stiffened, surprised, then hugged her back with the fierce protectiveness he inherited from hardship. Mia buried her face in Claire's shoulder, whispering, "Mom, what's wrong?" Aiden giggled, not understanding, but hugging her anyway. Claire held them tighter, her voice shaking, but full of light. "We're safe," she whispered. "We're home. This is our home now." As they clung to her, the sunlight broke fully through the trees, casting golden beams across the porch. The last of winter's frost glimmered and softened, surrendering to spring. Snowbird Cabin stood strong behind them, reborn, claimed and alive. Its walls no longer whispering with loneliness but humming with the laughter of a family finally finding their place in the world. Claire closed her eyes, lifted her face to the warmth, and whispered a promise meant for the sky, the land and the spirit she felt lingering in the cabin's beams. We found our miracle. In the end, Claire understood something she could never have learned in the warm comfort of an easy life. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in thunder or lightning. They whisper through old walls, through forgotten letters, through kindness left behind by people we never meet. Sometimes God doesn't open the door all at once. He leaves small signs, gentle nudges, and quiet reassurances that we are not walking alone. Snowbird Cabin was never just a shelter. It was a reminder that even in the harshest winter, God plants seeds of hope beneath the snow, waiting for the right moment to bloom. And just like Claire, many of us face seasons where everything feels frozen, heavy, or lost. But if we hold on, if we keep taking one step, one prayer, one breath at a time, grace finds its way to us. Maybe through a stranger's kindness, maybe through a door we never expected to open, maybe through a miracle disguised as an old cabin in the woods. If this story touched your heart, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they're not forgotten. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, resilience, and God's quiet miracles. May the Lord bless you, protect your home, and surround your family with His grace today and always.